Twister wasn't built to quietly observe storms. It was built to charge straight into them. Wind ripping apart metal, sirens screaming across the sky, cameras that never blink, never flinch, never look away. This wasn't a movie about watching storms. It was a movie about running directly toward them. But behind the roaring engines and flying debris, the production itself was fighting storms of its own. The chaos didn't stop at the camera lens. It followed the people making the film. A real town was hit by disaster before it ever became a movie set, and Universal Studios would later build a storm you could literally walk into and test yourself against. These are 10 strange and surprising facts about Twister, the movie that turned weather into a monster and dared audiences to stand in its path. On screen, Twister feels like controlled chaos. Debris flies at the perfect moment, cameras glide through destruction. Everything feels precisely engineered. But behind the scenes, control was constantly slipping away. Director Jan de Bont approached the movie like a cinematographer with a short fuse. He wanted the storm to feel real, not staged. So the crew worked in brutal conditions. Wind machines screamed so loudly nobody could hear each other speak. Massive rigs shook the ground beneath them. Every shot required exact timing. One mistake could destroy the entire setup. Every day was pressure. Every shot was a risk. And eventually, the tension exploded. During a complicated setup, someone accidentally stepped into frame. De Bont didn't quietly reset the shot. He erupted in front of the entire crew. The outburst was so intense that the camera department walked off the production. Cinematographer Don Burgess and more than 20 crew members left the set. For most movies, that kind of walkout ends the production. But Twister was already moving too fast to stop. A new director of photography, Jack N. Green, was brought in to stabilize the shoot. Then disaster struck again. Green was injured in an on-set accident and hospitalized. Now the movie wasn't just battling storms on screen, it was fighting to survive in real life. That's when Jan de Bont did something almost unheard of. He picked up the camera himself. For the rest of the production, he wasn't just directing actors in chaos, he was personally controlling the camera, choosing lenses, framing shots, and moving the camera through the action. He became both director and cinematographer at the same time. That's why the movie feels so aggressive and physical. The camera doesn't watch the storm, it attacks it. The lens pushes forward like it's trying to outrun the wind, instead of simply documenting it. You're not just watching a disaster movie, you're watching a film made in conditions where control wasn't guaranteed. It had to be fought for. Twister makes you believe the danger is outside the truck, up in the sky. But much of the real danger happened inside the cab. Jan de Bont insisted on filming in Oklahoma to capture real horizons and real landscapes. But the weather didn't cooperate the way movies require. Many days were bright and sunny, and for a storm movie, bright blue skies are a nightmare, especially when half your scenes take place inside vehicles with windows showing the outside world. So the production fought the sun with brute force. Powerful lights blasted into the truck cabin to darken the outside sky on camera and make it look like a storm was forming. The trick worked, but it came with a cost. Helen Hunt and Bill Paxton spent hours trapped in that cramped vehicle while the lights grew stronger and stronger. Eventually, the intensity became dangerous. Both actors suffered temporary blindness from the lights. They needed eye drops, protective sunglasses, and days of recovery. Bill Paxton later described the experience bluntly. He said it felt like his eyeballs had been burned. And the truck wasn't the only hazard. In one sequence, the actors had to fall into filthy ditch water. Afterwards, both had to receive hepatitis shots as a precaution. Helen Hunt also suffered multiple stunt injuries, including a head impact that alarmed the crew. At one point, when the director called her clumsy, Hunt fired back with a line that perfectly captured the mood of the shoot. "The guy burned my retinas, but I'm clumsy?" Ironically, the massive tornadoes audiences saw on screen weren't even present during filming. They were added months later through digital effects. The sky was fake, but the pain inside that truck was very real. After enduring heat, injuries, and physical punishment during filming, Bill Paxton still felt the final movie was missing something, not spectacle, fear. He described the finished film as the Pepsi version of what it could have been. Not small, just safer. Paxton believed tornadoes should feel less like an adventure ride and more like a predator, and he had a plan to make that happen. He wanted to direct a sequel himself, but his idea was darker and more grounded in history. Paxton was fascinated by the 1925 tri-state tornado, still the deadliest tornado in American history. The storm stayed on the ground for hours. It tore across multiple states and erased entire towns. That was the tone he wanted, not storm-chasing romance, something closer to Jaws in the sky, a force that doesn't negotiate, it simply arrives. He even imagined using advanced 3D technology, not as spectacle, but to trap audiences in the storm's path and make them feel pinned in place as the tornado approached. Another idea involved a generational story, Bill and Joe's daughter inheriting the mission and the trauma that comes with it. But the film was never made. The idea never moved past the concept stage. And in 2017, Bill Paxton passed away. With him, the sequel he imagined disappeared as well, leaving behind a haunting thought. In his mind, there was a version of Twister that didn't comfort audiences. It scared them silent. On paper, Twister looked like an unstoppable project. Michael Crichton was involved in the story. Steven Spielberg's Amblin Entertainment was backing the production, and the director had just come off the massive success of Speed. But the script was far from stable. The writing process didn't end when filming began. It continued while trucks were moving, stunts were happening, and weather kept interrupting production. The story constantly needed repairs. Not full rewrites, more like emergency surgery. Several writers were quietly brought in to fix scenes and strengthen dialogue. Joss Whedon was one of the most notable contributors. He helped sharpen character moments and improve the rhythm of conversations. But even his involvement was chaotic. He entered the project, left, returned, and left again due to illness and scheduling conflicts. Other writers, including Jeff Nathanson and Steven Zaillian, also contributed. At times, new pages were sent directly to the set while filming was already underway. Zaillian later discovered that none of the scenes he worked on actually made it into the final cut, not because they were bad, but because the movie kept changing. What worked on paper didn't always survive the chaos of filming and editing. In the end, Twister wasn't written once, it was rewritten again and again just to survive production. At one point, the movie was supposed to be directed by Spielberg himself. Early plans placed him directly in the director's chair, but as the project grew bigger, louder, and more focused on spectacle, Spielberg stepped back from directing and stayed on only as executive producer. The job went to Jan de Bont instead, because he knew how to turn motion into panic. Years later, Spielberg openly admitted what made the movie work. It wasn't the dialogue, it wasn't the plot, it was the tornadoes, the feeling that the sky itself had become a weapon, and that realization shaped the movie's legacy.